Hey everybody, it's your boy, and today's video is going to be a bit of a rant about certain attitudes that I see, not just on the left, but increasingly on the right. And that is blaming things on nebulous concepts when they could actually be taking some individual responsibility for themselves and practice what they preach. We see this all the time, and it's really beginning to irk me. So the classic one that both the left and the right use is that they like to blame society. Usually when leftists blame society for things, it's to do with social things, not necessarily political things. So for example, men. Men are apparently emotionless, and we're emotionless because society tells us we must be emotionless. We must hide our feelings. If only men were to be more honest and open about their feelings, the world would be a better place and there wouldn't be any sexism and misogyny and things like that. When of course, a cursory glance at studies between the sexes will actually find that actually most men, in general, not every man, doesn't really want to talk about their feelings. It's not that they can't, they just don't want to. And that isn't because they're repressed or that society is telling them not to. It's because, well, the way that men tend to live their lives, and I guess to some extent you can argue this is society, although I would argue this is evolution, men tend to find themselves in positions of authority whether they like it or not. They have to have a sense of emotional control. That's what it is. It's not repression, it's control. And also, they deal with emotional stress and depression and things like that in a different way to women. They're not repressing their feelings, they're trying to do something different to solve these issues. So most men will just go back to work and work through their grief or suffering or depression. Some men might go fishing, some men might have copious amounts of sex, some men might play music. Men like to do stuff in order to deal with their emotions and their issues, as opposed to talk about it. Whereas women, most of them, not all of them, prefer to talk about it. That's what they like to do. That's how they get it out of their system. And that doesn't mean that what works for women will work for men, or what works for men will work for women. We're all different, and there's nothing wrong with that. That isn't society telling us that we should be like that. No. Stop blaming society for something that people naturally seem to want to do anyway. And even then, it seems to me that it comes from a position of weakness on their part. Like, they could just leave people alone to deal with their own issues, but they can't. They have to make it out like it's society that's doing something to them. And I have to wonder, why do you want men to be more open about feelings? Why? If they don't want to, why are you trying to force it out of them? It seems to me like it's projection on a lot of these feminist and leftist parts. They just want men to be more like them, more like women, more feminine. That's really what it is. It's projection. It's not society telling men what to do. It's feminists telling men what to do. It's always been the case. And of course, it's not just down to them also when it comes to telling men what to do. Another social issue that the left like to go on about in regards to society is jobs. They're always moaning about how society is forcing women down these particular career paths and men down these particular career paths. If they had only learnt feminism earlier, they wouldn't have been a nurse, they wouldn't have been a teacher, they wouldn't have been this, that and the other. They might have gone into STEM, they might have become an IT specialist, they might have been a soldier. Well, unfortunately for you, and this is perfectly proven by events in Norway, there is a whole documentary on this. Norway is essentially the most freest society when it comes to gender freedom, I guess. I can't think of a word for it, a phrase. Basically, men and women have unparalleled freedom to choose whatever they want. I mean, it's the same in everywhere in the West, but that's besides the point. Apparently, in Norway, you're even freer. I don't know how you can be more free than free. And it turns out, given all this freedom, men choose to go into the traditionally male paths in careers, like STEM, the army, things like that. And women choose, most of them, not all of them, would like to become nurses or teachers, the usual feminine careers. And the Norwegians are baffled. We've spent all this money trying to get men and women to do these different roles, yet they choose not to. It's almost like we're wired differently, most of us anyway. Again, you guys have the freedom to choose your careers. You've always have done. There's really been very few times in the past where men and women have not been able to choose their career paths, yet you choose not to. You all do this stereotypical stuff because, like it or not, you're stereotypical men or women. And society can't be blamed for men and women choosing their own career paths or you choosing your own. And why is it that you have to dictate to others what they can and cannot do? Well, I know why, and you know why, and I've mentioned it far too many times on this channel. So let's move on to another issue. The right like to blame society for telling men and women what they can and cannot do in regards to having families and children and things like that. I see it all the time. Often modernity can also be used as a substitute for society, and even some leftists will use modernity if they're a bit more esoteric, shall we say, than the typical leftist. So often the big issue is having children. We're always being told by these people that society and modernity is forcing them not to have kids earlier because they can't get money, they can't get jobs, they can't get a house, they can't find a date, they can't get married, because apparently society has told us that we have to get married in our early 30s or late 20s and have kids in our late 30s. And apparently women, if they don't have a kid early enough, then they're going to hit the wall at 30 and it's all going to be pandemonium. They're not going to have kids, they're going to go mental, and they're going to die alone with cats. That is one of the many things I see. I see it constantly on Twitter. Women and men complaining about this issue. And all I have to say is, well, why don't you just do it? Find a partner. For women, it's much more easier than men. Find a partner. You all know where you are on Twitter or online. Just go out there, get a date, find the person for you, move in with them, because I assume both of you have jobs. I'm sure you can find a place in the UK that is cheap enough for you to live in, and then you can go and have your children, and you can be merry and live that traditional life that you want to. There's actually no societal pressure on you to not live like that. Nobody's telling you to. Also, I find a lot of people online on the right are telling young men and women that they have to marry really early. So if they're in their 20s and they're dating somebody, this is what I genuinely saw on Twitter once. If a man is dating a woman and they're both in their 20s, he has to decide immediately after 6 months to marry her or not. And if he doesn't choose to marry her after 6 months, then he has to leave her. Why? I think it's to do with fertility and things like that. But that baffles me, because apart from very few people, how many couples marry after 6 months? I mean, it's not very often. You really need to know the person before you can really say that, yes, I'd like to marry this person. And sometimes you don't truly get to know a person for a couple of years. I mean, how do you get to know a person deeply in 6 months? I mean, I'm sorry, but being intimate in bed isn't enough to know this person. You have to actually get to know their personality and the things that they like and dislike and things like that. And that can take ages. And sometimes it takes living with this person in extended periods to truly find out. I mean, during lockdown, loads of couples ended because they ended up living with each other a bit too much. So they found out habits that they otherwise wouldn't have seen from this person, and they didn't like it. This is how complicated this question is. It's not a case of, oh, after 6 months, after a year, marry them or not. Why are we doing this? Why are we offering this stupid advice to people? It doesn't make sense. And it's all based on this hatred for modernity in society and these preconceived notions that they're being told to do things by this mythical society, by this mythical modernity, when really nobody's telling them to do anything. Now, one could argue from the left and the right that there are incentives in play that will force people down certain paths, and that could be true, but you don't have to play by the rules. You can go against the incentives. Again, you do have choice. You're not determined to do this, that and the other by your environment necessarily. Again, if you have a good job, if you have a girlfriend and you guys love each other very much and you are determined to have kids with each other, what are you waiting for? Move in with each other, have children, make more money in order to have these kids. But nobody ever does, or very few people do. It does make me wonder whether or not these people really do want to have kids. Likewise, it makes me wonder whether or not these leftists really want to help people and they say they need to be more open with their feelings and have these careers in these fields. It seems to me that really all this society nonsense, all this modernity nonsense is just a charade. It's really just an excuse for their own bad behaviour. They don't want to take personal responsibility for their own actions and for their own lifestyles because they don't practice what they preach. And the thing is, if society, if modernity, if the system, because also the leftists and to a lesser extent the right-wingers don't like the system, it's the system that is geared towards a certain type of person, like whites in the leftists' case, and is against, for example, the blacks and the Hispanics and God knows who else, because it's a system of systemic repression and oppression, obviously. Again, that is nothing but an excuse, usually used to excuse criminal behaviour on the part of minorities and to demonise good behaviour from not just white people who have done well for themselves or as a group, but also black people who are doing very similar things, building up human capital, putting their kids through school, making sure they have a good work ethic, etc., etc. They use these things to attack them so that black people in America especially, and also increasingly in this country, they keep them in the Democratic or Labour plantations, whereas white people are demonised because you need an other. Take ownership of your lives, guys, for God's sake. Who represents modernity and society and the system is actually telling you to live like this? There are people who write articles, I guess, advising people in magazines and online and on Twitter, as I've mentioned before, but you don't have to listen to them. Why should you listen to them? You have your own life, you have your own choices, you're your own person. If you feel strongly that you as a woman should work in STEM and have a career, go ahead and do so, but be aware that there's a trade-off. You might not have the time to have a family. You may not have time to have stable relationships. Likewise, if you are a traditional person and you want to get married and have kids, do so. And if you want to do it young, yeah, do so. But bear in mind, again, there is a trade-off. You might not be as well off initially as a younger person as you might be as an older person without kids. Again, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs, and you have to decide this for yourself. To paraphrase Rothbard, society really isn't real, at least not in the way that we think it is. This mythical system or modernity isn't telling you to do anything. It's simply a way for the people who are hypocrites to tell you what to do, to try and make you conform to their ways of living because they want you to do that, but they don't want to do it themselves for whatever reason. That's really what it is. Just live your lives. Remember, we're thrown into the world and we have choices that we have to make. You can choose to be like everybody else or not. It's up to you. Honestly, that's really what it boils down to. You have freedom of choice to have kids or not. And you also have the freedom to decide whether or not to listen to these people. I say, don't listen to these people because most of them are full of crap, and just follow your gut. Follow your instinct. What you think will make your life better. Do it. And if you make a mistake, rectify it. That's really all it is.